Here's the claim that was made in Shiny Happy People about Bill Gothard molesting young women in vans.
You would get chosen to ride in Mr. Gothard's van. All of us were under 18. He would always have a girl next to him. There was always petting to heavy petting, his hand on knees, up skirts. We never talked about it. I knew it was weird, but I didn't know it was wrong.
This clip is from Amazon Prime's hit piece docuseries Shiny Happy People, the program that was released in June 2023 that tried to fallaciously link abuse of all kinds, including sexual abuse, to Christians and homeschoolers by using scandals associated with the famous Duggar family, the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP, and Bill Gothard, its founder. In this clip, Lara Smith is saying she was one of many young women who were groped and abused by Bill Gothard while riding in vans to different destinations. This was another instance where I was certainly concerned about the allegations when I first saw the docuseries. A man of God, a spiritual leader, groping young women in a van on a regular basis? Well, that would certainly be awful if true. But was it true? I decided to lay out her story and examine what she said, as well as ask others who were in the same circumstances of riding in vans with Mr. Gothard to see if this actually was a cohesive and possibly true story. The first thing that made me question her story was this.
You would get chosen to ride in Mr. Gothard's van. All of us were under 18.
She says she was in a van with several other people, young ladies, all under 18. So the first point we would have to believe to say her story is true is that Mr. Gothard would openly grope young women in the presence of other young women in a small space like a van. What I have found in my investigation is that when Bill Gothard went on trips in vans, there would always be his assistant and many times another staff member with them, plus a driver. So he would have to perform this behavior in front of all those people as well as the young ladies. That doesn't seem plausible. That alone sounded shaky. Sexual predators, especially ones in publicly scrutinized positions like Mr. Gothard was, hide their behavior. They don't do it in front of others. So the first thing she said didn't make sense at the get-go. And I also found that the people at the training center's ages range from mid-teens to, say, mid-20s. So it's also unlikely that all the young people were under 18 that were in the vans on a regular basis. But I thought I needed to set all that aside and look at the rest of her story. Next, she says, petting to heavy petting, hands on knees and up skirts.
He would always have a girl next to him. There was always petting to heavy petting, his hand on knees, up skirts.
The skirts these young women wore were longer skirts. So you'd have to believe that Mr. Gothard put his hand down at their ankle and put his hand up their skirts, which of course would have raised their skirts in front of everyone else. Again, when thinking of her story and the actual logistics of what she claims, that is very difficult to believe. But the next thing she says really clinched it for me. She says, "We never talked about it." And notice the picture of Gothard surrounded by girls while he's sitting in a large wicker chair. I'll address that picture later in this video.
His hand on knees, up skirts. We never talked about it. I knew it was weird, but I didn't know it was wrong.
I have to say this statement was one of the clinchers to it being an unbelievable story. So here she is claiming that young girls, under 18, teens, went back to their dorms where they lived together in close quarters, they roomed together, they ate meals together, attended classes, participated in activities, and worked together. These young ladies were groped regularly in the presence of others and each other and never discussed it. Girls, teen girls, who talk about everything. They gossip up a storm. They constantly share the drama in their lives. These kinds of girls at that age went back to their dorms and never talked about it. Not to each other, not to any staff members, not to their parents. They never talked about it. Again, does that seem plausible and true? It doesn't to me. Then she says she didn't know it was wrong.
I knew it was weird, but I didn't know it was wrong.
This is absolutely not true. There is not one woman who is being honest about it that would have had a man put his hand up her skirt as an older teen or young adult and not know that was wrong, especially in an environment where it was taught that sexual contact before marriage is wrong. Every young woman, teens and above, would know that was wrong. And by the way, she is suggesting here she has to mean all of them didn't know it was wrong and all of them didn't talk about it. That I definitely do not believe. So in order to believe this story, we have to believe these things. That on a regular basis, Bill Gothard chose young women to ride in vans with him, with his assistant and a driver, and usually another staff member present. And in that setting, he openly groped these young women. It happened all the time. They didn't realize it was wrong. He lifted their skirts by placing his hands up them, and that all these teens don't ever talk about this behavior amongst themselves to anyone, including each other, their parents, their friends, staff members, and etc. That is what we have to believe this story. Well, I don't think that is a reasonable thing to believe. This just doesn't sound like a true story at all. It just doesn't make logical sense. So I started asking around to other IBLP participants that also rode in vans with Mr. Gothard, some on a regular basis. All of them said nothing like that ever happened that they saw. They also said he was usually using the time to do dictation, answering letters, and having his assistant write out answers to later be typed and sent by mail. In fact, in the upcoming documentary, Shiny SLANDER, I will show some documentation from young women's journal entries describing their rides in vans with Mr. Gothard. None of them mention any such behavior. But she also told another story in Shiny Happy People that had similar problems to it. Before I go into that story, I wanted to mention that I reached out to Lara on social media and asked if she could give me any names of others who were in the vans at the time that this would have happened. I suggested she could ask them first before giving me their names, so she would not have to do it without talking to them first. She, of course, declined to offer any assistance in finding witnesses to verify her account. She also cussed at me for asking. I have found no one who can verify that they witnessed this kind of behavior by Bill Gothard in the vans. And a side note, all of the people that have told stories on Shiny Happy People that have huge holes in them use the same language to try to dissuade anyone from asking questions, once again, claiming victimhood. Just like the woman who I featured in the Joshua Pease video, whose name I didn't reveal, Brooke Arnold and Lindsay Williams, Lara also said asking her if she would answer questions about her testimony was, quote, stalking and harassment. Those kinds of things just aren't going to work to keep me from investigating. It's not stalking to politely ask reasonable questions and give the person you're featuring a chance to answer the things that don't make sense in their testimony. Once asked and given plenty of chance to reply, to at least make their story believable by filling in those holes. If they choose not to answer, that's up to them. But giving them the chance to answer is not stalking or harassment. And just like claiming victimhood in that way, they are lessening the real stalking and harassment that real victims of that behavior endure. Lara tells another story in episode 4 of Shiny Happy People, where she tells of an incident that allegedly happened at a training center. She claims that a male maintenance worker came into her room at night and climbed into her bed.
When I was at a training center, one of the boys who was in charge of the maintenance at the training center, one night he came in and he climbed into my bed. I didn't know how to say, I don't want you in my bed, get out please, because I'd never been taught that. And not only that, but any back talk was beat out of us at a young age. So I can say with experience that sexual assault in training centers within the Institute under Bill Gothard is very real and rampant.
That would be horrible if true, scary and confusing, and certainly beyond inappropriate. So I wanted to consider this story too. What would we have to believe in order for this scenario to be true? First, that a male staff member was in the girls' dormitory area at night. That obviously was not allowed. But yes, he could have snuck in, true. So next we would have to believe he went into her room knowing that she was not expecting him, and in the presence of other roommates. They did not have private rooms, so there would have to be others present in the room at the time. Next, we would have to believe she wouldn't know to tell him to leave. She claims in the piece that they were conditioned to obey no matter what.
I didn't know how to say, I don't want you in my bed, get out please, because I'd never been taught that. And not only that, but any back talk was beat out of us at a young age.
This is another thing I cannot believe to be true, that she would not know this was wrong and that she wouldn't know to tell him to leave. But let's put all of that aside for a moment. Also, it is indicated without being stated that he assaulted her, which she never really actually says happened to her in the story, but she does say this.
I can say with experience that sexual assault in training centers within the Institute under Bill Gothard is very real and rampant.
So we have to then assume he would have sexually assaulted her while others were in the room. After all, she didn't know to tell him to leave. And additionally, we would obviously have to believe he would leave after this assault and nothing was said about it to anyone or by anyone who would have been present at the time. Just a note, all the young people kept journals. It was part of the practice of being at the training centers. So that means there would have to be one of her journals with this alleged assault in it, or in the journals of others who were in the room at the time too, or we would have to believe that none of them wrote about this, or none of them woke up during this alleged assault, which we would of course assume she would have to have made some kind of noise if she were being assaulted. And he escaped unheard and unseen by everyone else in the room. So though I realize she could have been assaulted at some time and in some way, this story doesn't make sense at all, just like the story of being assaulted in the Vans doesn't make sense. Was she ever really assaulted? Maybe, it's possible, but the accounts she's giving are not reasonable to believe as she's telling them. And if she were assaulted, why tell this kind of tale about it? Why not just tell it as it happened? Something isn't right here. Considering that there were thousands of people who came and went at the training centers over decades of time, it is likely there were some sexual assaults that took place at some point in some way somewhere. That's just statistically an extremely likely possibility anywhere you have that many people in that many places in one organization. But according to Lara, sexual assaults were rampant.
I can say with experience that sexual assault in training centers within the Institute under Bill Gothard is very real and rampant.
Where is the evidence of rampant sexual assaults happening in the IBLP training centers all over the country? Lara is also the same woman who made this claim.
The Institute raises little predators.
It seems to me that this woman is trying very hard to say tantalizing and dramatic statements for the Shiny Happy People production. But the things she is claiming do not make logical sense. Just laying out the logistics of her stories show that they cannot have happened as she stated them. Later in Shiny Happy People, she also reveals she had problems with being honest because she was caught shoplifting, and suggests that her problems were due to her participating in IBLP.
In my 20s, I started shoplifting, and I didn't know why I did it. I didn't need anything. I was in jail several times, one time for about a week. I sought out an addiction recovery program. The first thing they had me do in their 12-step program was talk about and confront my childhood, which I had never done before.
Lara clearly has had many problems in her own life, and sadly she is blaming those problems on her participation in IBLP. She's also another one who has come to claim victimhood as a part of her identity, using it for online attention. Shiny Happy People also used a picture in these clips while Lara was talking of Bill Gothard sitting in a chair surrounded by young ladies. I did some research into this picture and found that this was taken at a restaurant back in the late 60s or early 70s. It was during a dinner where there were both male and female staff members in attendance, and the female members saw the chair and asked Mr. Gothard to sit in it for a picture. They were being silly, saying they were going to pretend to be his harem. Mr. Gothard was very reluctant at the time, and it's not clear whether or not he knew of their joke, but he did hesitate to cooperate with their plan to take that picture. The ladies pressed him, and he gave in for the picture. This picture has followed him for more than 50 years now and been falsely used as evidence of his sexual misconduct or his cult-like leadership when it was nothing of the kind. And Shiny Happy People and the Slanderous website I mentioned in another video have used this photograph for the purpose of suggesting there was something sexual about it to fit their agenda of bringing down Mr. Gothard and IBLP. This picture is not about sexual misconduct at all, but I doubt Shiny Happy People producers even tried to find the origin of the picture because it was easily used for their slanderous purposes just as it is. No explanation needed, because they were already framing the narrative to suggest Bill Gothard was a cult leader and a sexual predator. And this false framing worked out great for that purpose. Next time.
Children in homeschooling fundamentalist families are skanked all the way up into adulthood, and that includes older daughters, and that includes wives. And this is something that fundamentalist husbands do to their wives.
Do the Duggars and other Christian fathers spank their wives and older daughters? We'll talk about that next time. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe. I hope to see you here next time.